I had always thought I knew what chaos looked like. Between broken sprinklers, runaway goats, and my neighbor accidentally mowing over my tomato garden, I figured life on the farm would prepare me for anything. But that morning, sipping my coffee on the porch and listening to the gentle clucks of my chickens, I realized I had seriously underestimated one woman, Karen. Karen, the self-appointed sheriff of our little suburban farm hybrid neighborhood, the kind of person who believed that a straight hedge was more important than world peace. That morning, she was plotting something monumental, and it was heading straight toward me. I first noticed it when a white van rolled slowly down the dirt road near the edge of my property. At first, I figured it was just a delivery driver, lost and confused, like most people are when they see my farm instead of the rows of cookie-cutter houses Karen adored. But then I saw the vests, reflective neon vests, clipboards, radios, and the way they were looking at my chickens as if each one were a dangerous criminal. That's when it hit me. Karen had sent her patrol. I laughed nervously. The absurdity of it all was staggering. I mean, the last time Karen sent someone over, it was because my lawn gnome wasn't facing exactly north, and somehow that was a hazard to community aesthetics. I wasn't exaggerating. She literally fined me $50 for having a gnome in the wrong orientation. But this felt bigger. Something about the way they moved, the intensity with which they observed every fence post, every chicken, every patch of grass told me Karen had escalated. This was her ultimate power trip. I decided to go outside, coffee in hand, partly to assert my presence and partly because, let's be honest, I needed to see the comedy unfold firsthand. "Morning," I called, trying to sound cheerful. "Enjoying the chickens or just making sure they aren't forming a union?" They ignored me. They never ignored me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be just another Karen-style warning. They were serious. Or at least they thought they were serious. And yet there was something about the way they whispered into their radios and glanced at something or someone on the other side of the property that didn't fit the HOA's usual nonsense. I stepped closer, my dog trotting alongside me, tail wagging like he was fully aware of the impending chaos. The patrol started measuring fences, counting chickens, jotting notes with exaggerated precision. I couldn't help but smirk. "Wow," I muttered under my breath. I always thought my goats were rebellious, but apparently my chickens are the real troublemakers. And then, just as I was starting to relax, I noticed it. Little details that didn't make sense. A badge that looked slightly off, radios that weren't the usual walkie-talkie nonsense HOA patrols carry, the way they jumped slightly at something only I could hear, a click, a beep, a low hum in the background. Something was off. Something was very, very off. I sank back behind the porch railing, pretending to adjust a flower pot while trying not to panic. My farm had always been peaceful. Morning chores, fresh eggs, and the occasional neighbor waving politely from across the fence, that was my life. But now, with these strangers moving through my property like they were part of a military operation, I realized the calm, simple life I cherished was about to be interrupted in the most insane way imaginable. And then it clicked, the subtle smirk on the lead patrol member's face, the way he whispered a word I didn't catch to the person beside him. It wasn't HOA. Oh no, this wasn't just Karen sending her usual overzealous minions. Something else was happening here, something bigger, something that had nothing to do with bylaws or fines or whether my chicken coop met aesthetic standards. Whatever this was, it was about to drag me into a situation I couldn't have imagined even in my wildest dreams. So I did what any reasonable farmer with a hint of self-preservation would do. I put down my coffee, straightened my posture, and told myself to stay calm. And maybe, just maybe, I started to smile a little. Because if Karen thought she could intimidate me, well, she had no idea that her little patrol was about to stumble into a world far, far beyond HOA fines. Little did I know that morning would change everything on my farm. What started as a typical Karen overreach was about to explode into chaos, embarrassment, and if I was lucky, a story I'd tell for years. But before I could even process it, the patrol moved closer and the first chicken darted into a fence post, setting off a chain reaction that would make this day one of the most unforgettable mornings of my life. By mid-morning, Karen's patrol had fully established themselves on my property. I tried to appear calm, like this was just another Monday, but inside I was anything but. The moment they stepped onto my grass, clipboard-clad and taking measurements with exaggerated seriousness, I felt a mixture of amusement and dread. My dog, sensing the tension or maybe just excited by the novelty, was weaving between their legs, yipping like a miniature alarm system. I walked toward them, trying to keep my tone casual. "Good morning, officers, or should I call you the HOA Special Response Team?" My voice dripped with sarcasm, though I kept it light. One of them glanced at me and mumbled something under his breath, probably thinking he was being intimidating. Spoiler alert, he was. I followed at a safe distance as they began their inspection. One measured the distance between my chicken coop and the fence, muttering numbers I didn't understand. Another jotted down notes while inspecting the compost pile like it might spontaneously combust. My heart was pounding with anticipation and my mind couldn't stop racing. Why was Karen going this far? Was this about the gnome again, the hedge? Or had she finally decided that my chickens were a threat to society? The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh out loud until I noticed something peculiar. The lead patrol member kept glancing toward a part of the farm I rarely visit near the back fence. His hands twitched over a radio and he whispered words I didn't catch. There was a subtle tension in the air, something that wasn't part of Karen's usual overzealous antics. I paused behind the tool shed, pretending to adjust the hose while discreetly watching. There was a level of coordination among them that went far beyond HOA overreach. Their movements were too precise, too calculated. I didn't know it yet, but Karen's patrol was walking straight into something much bigger. Meanwhile, Karen herself was nowhere to be seen, probably issuing orders via email or text while assuming her minions were executing her plan perfectly. I imagined her sitting at home, glasses perched on the end of her nose, nodding to herself as she thought, yes, this will finally teach them all a lesson about rules and respect. Little did she know, her little patrol was about to embarrass her in ways she couldn't even imagine. My dog, ever the opportunist, ran straight into a group of the patrol members, causing one clipboard to fly and another to trip over the hose. Chaos was slowly creeping in and I couldn't stop myself from chuckling. Relax, I muttered under my breath. This is going to be fun. And then it happened. A crate near the back of the property, the same one the patrol had been nervously eyeing, made a low, strange noise. Everyone froze, exchanging nervous glances. I ducked behind the tractor, trying to keep my laughter under control. Whatever was in that crate, they clearly weren't expecting it. The patrol whispered frantically into their radios, their movements sharp and almost panicked. My mind raced. Something wasn't right. This was no ordinary HOA raid. This was something else, something bigger, something I didn't yet understand. I realized that I was watching a ticking time bomb and the fuse had just been lit. The air felt electric, charged with anticipation and absurdity. Karen's obsession with rules had inadvertently put her patrol in the middle of something serious, something that had nothing to do with hedges or chicken coops. From my vantage point behind the shed, I could see the tension building. Sweat formed on the lead patrol member's forehead and one of the others dropped his clipboard, scrambling to pick it up before anyone noticed. My dog barked again as if sensing the gravity of the moment. I couldn't help but grin. This was turning into the kind of day that people tell stories about, an impossible, chaotic, laugh-out-loud disaster in the making. As the morning sun climbed higher, it became clear that Karen's patrol had no idea what they were stepping into. They were over their heads, completely oblivious, and it was only a matter of time before things spiraled out of control. And I, of course, had the perfect front row seat to watch every second of it. Little did I know, by the time this day ended, my peaceful farm would be the epicenter of chaos, embarrassment, and a story so insane that no one would believe it, even if I showed them the videos. Karen had no idea she was about to turn her patrol into a punchline, and I had no idea just how spectacularly it was about to happen. By late morning, Karen's patrol had fully crossed into my territory, clipboard warriors marching like soldiers on a mission. I leaned against the side of the barn, coffee long gone, trying to look casual, though my heart was pounding with a mixture of dread and amusement. The sight before me was ridiculous. These enforcers were measuring fences, counting chickens, and taking meticulous notes on the exact tilt of my scarecrow. One of them even squinted at the compost pile like it had personally offended him. I decided it was time to engage. "Good morning," I called out, hands on my hips. "How's the inspection going? Everything up to code, or should I worry about my garden gnome orientation again?" The lead patrol member glanced at me, frowning. I could see him trying to muster authority, but there was something in his eyes that betrayed uncertainty. He muttered something under his breath into a radio, and my curiosity shot through the roof. These weren't ordinary HOA drones. Whatever Karen had hired or somehow convinced was a step above neighborhood enforcement, and yet something still felt off. I continued my tour around the property, casually inspecting the chickens. They clucked as if mocking the patrol, hopping and running around the startled adults. One chicken even pecked at a notebook lying on the ground. The chaos was hilarious. "Relax," I said to myself, smirking. "This is Karen's world, and today her world is about to collide with reality." Then I noticed it, a crate at the far end of the farm, one that hadn't been there before. It was stacked neatly near the barn, wrapped in tape and marked with official-looking symbols. The patrol froze the second their eyes landed on it. Suddenly, the meticulous inspection turned into full-blown panic. Radios were tapped frantically, whispers ricocheted between members, and one of them fumbled his clipboard. I crouched behind the tractor, unable to contain my laughter as the absurdity of the situation hit me. Karen's patrol had stumbled onto something serious, something I wasn't entirely sure I should even be observing, but the expression of fear and confusion on their faces was priceless. My dog ran up to inspect the crate, sniffing like a tiny detective, and then darted away when a loud beep echoed from inside. That was the first clue something was very wrong. This wasn't about chicken coop aesthetics. This wasn't about yard appearance. This was bigger. The patrol members whispered into radios with a tension I hadn't seen from them before. One started packing, muttering about unauthorized packages and protocol breaches. I realized with a mixture of awe and amusement that Karen's plan had completely backfired. She had sent her little army into a real-life scenario they weren't prepared for, and I was witnessing it unfold like a slow-motion disaster movie. I peeked around the side of the barn, trying to make sense of it. The lead patrol member kept gesturing nervously as if signaling an imaginary superior. One of the others was frantically checking paperwork, muttering, "I don't think we're supposed to be here." I could hear the panic in their voices. Every fiber of their overconfident posturing was unraveling before my eyes. I couldn't resist adding a little commentary. "Don't worry, guys," I called out, smiling widely. "Everything's fine. The chickens haven't filed a complaint yet." My dog barked in agreement, bounding around their feet, creating more chaos. And then it clicked. The movement, the tension, the frantic whispers. It wasn't HOA paranoia. Something real was happening here. Whatever this crate was, whatever the patrol had stumbled onto, it wasn't part of Karen's fantasy world of rules and regulations. This was serious, very serious. I ducked behind the hay bales, heart racing, as my mind processed the possibilities. Police? A sting operation? Something illegal? I didn't know yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Karen had no idea what she'd unleashed. Her little team, armed with clipboards and a misplaced sense of authority, had just walked straight into a situation far beyond their comprehension. And as the patrol members moved closer to the crate, whispering urgently, I couldn't stop myself from grinning. This was going to be one for the books. Karen had officially lost control, and I was about to witness the perfect storm of chaos, confusion, and karma, all on my farm. Little did I know, the next moments would turn my peaceful morning into a spectacle of absurdity, fear, and disbelief, and there would be no way to undo the events that were about to unfold. By mid-morning, the tension on my farm had reached a level I'd never experienced before. Karen's patrol, once strutting around like a pack of self-important neighborhood enforcers, was now frozen, eyes darting nervously between the crates near the barn and their radios. The air felt electric, each rustle of hay or cluck of a chicken amplified into a potential disaster. I ducked behind a stack of feed bags, coffee long forgotten, watching the absurdity unfold like a slow-motion comedy. The crate had become the center of their attention, and I could see the panic spreading like wildfire. One patrol member was crouched beside it, hands hovering, unsure whether to touch it or run screaming. Another whispered frantically into the radio, probably calling for guidance that wasn't coming. My dog, oblivious to the tension, circled the crate like it was a treasure chest, tail wagging, adding to the chaos. And then I heard the first real clue that something wasn't right. A faint clicking sound, followed by a low hum, came from inside the crate. The patrol members stiffened, eyes widening. I felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with disbelief. This wasn't about garden gnomes or hedge heights. This was something serious. One of the patrol members whispered something I caught clearly. "We shouldn't be here. This isn't HOA. This is federal." I stifled a laugh behind the hay bales. I had suspected that something larger than Karen's imagination was at play, but hearing it confirmed in real time was almost surreal. Karen had unknowingly sent her little army straight into the middle of a real police operation. The lead patrol member was now visibly panicking. He gestured at the crate like it had personally offended him, his voice shaking. "What do we do? Do we call Karen?" The thought was absurd. Even if Karen had been available, her idea of authority consisted of threatening fines and sending passive-aggressive emails. She had zero power here. I tried to suppress my laughter, knowing full well that any sound from me might push them over the edge. I glanced at the crate again, noting the strange labels and official markings that had gone unnoticed until now. Something in my gut told me this was part of a bigger operation, maybe a drug bust or some high-level sting, but I couldn't be certain. What I did know was that the panic on Karen's patrol was reaching ridiculous levels. One of them dropped his clipboard, scrambling to pick it up as if touching it might unleash a catastrophe. Another accidentally tripped over the hose I had left out for watering the garden, and I nearly doubled over laughing. Then it happened. A voice shouted from beyond the fence, clear and commanding, cutting through the tension. "Everyone freeze, step away from the crates." My eyes widened. My first thought was that Karen had called reinforcements, but no, these were real officers, moving with precision, authority, and a level of seriousness Karen had never even dreamed of. The patrol members froze in place, panic etched into every line of their faces. Some raised their hands, others stumbled backward, realizing they were completely out of their depth, and there I was, crouched behind a hay bale, trying to keep calm while grinning uncontrollably. Karen's plan had completely backfired, and I was watching the perfect storm unfold. I could hear the officers issuing rapid commands, moving to secure the crates and cordoning off the area. Karen's patrol, meanwhile, looked around in confusion, trying to figure out why their authority was suddenly irrelevant. One muttered something about community standards, as if anyone cared at that moment. I realized I was witnessing history, a bizarre, chaotic, and hilarious collision of Karen's obsession with control and a real-life police operation. The situation was surreal. Chickens scattered in every direction, sprinklers had accidentally turned on, and the patrol members were frozen like deer in headlights. Meanwhile, the officers calmly assessed the situation, moving with precision, their presence making Karen's minions seem like extras in a comedy skit. I couldn't stop smiling. This was the ultimate karma moment, a perfect collision of hubris, chaos, and reality. Karen had unleashed her patrol thinking they would intimidate me, enforce community standards, and show who was boss. Instead, they had walked straight into a federal operation, and the chaos had only just begun. As I crouched behind the hay bales, heart racing and mind spinning, I realized one thing. The morning that started with coffee and clucking chickens had turned into a spectacle so absurd, so intense that it would be impossible to forget. Karen had no idea the disaster she had orchestrated, and I, of course, had the best seat in the house. By late morning, my farm had officially descended into chaos. The moment the officers arrived, the whole scene exploded like a fireworks show gone rogue. Karen's patrol had no idea what to do. Their clipboards shook in their hands, their bright vests sticking out like sore thumbs against the disciplined, no-nonsense officers. They tried to assert authority, waving hands and shouting, "This is a residential property, you can't just..." But no one was listening. Not a single officer spared them a glance. Chickens scattered in every direction, honking and flapping like they were part of some poultry rebellion. My dog, of course, thought it was a game and chased them, yipping with absolute joy. One of Karen's patrol members slipped on a patch of mud and ended up rolling into the garden, sending a row of tomato plants flying. I nearly doubled over laughing. I had seen ridiculous things on this farm before, but nothing quite like this. Meanwhile, the lead officer barked commands like a drill sergeant, cordoning off the crates and directing his team with precision. Karen's patrol, still holding their clipboards like shields, looked increasingly useless. I could see the panic in their eyes. They had been trained, if you could call it that, to measure fences and enforce HOA rules, not to survive a real sting operation unfolding on my property. At one point, the officer closest to the crate glanced directly at me. His expression was calm, almost apologetic, as if silently saying, "You didn't sign up for this, did you?" I simply shrugged, trying not to laugh too loudly, because any sudden movement from me might send Karen's patrol into a full-blown panic spiral. The crate itself was humming faintly, drawing attention from everyone nearby. Karen's patrol whispered frantically among themselves, trying to decide if they should touch it, move it, or heaven forbid call Karen for instructions. One of them muttered, "Maybe we should leave before things get criminal." The sheer absurdity made me choke on a laugh. Criminal, yes, but not in the way they thought. I ducked behind a hay bale and took a deep breath, trying to process what was happening. My peaceful farm, my sanctuary from the world, had turned into a surreal cross between a slapstick comedy and an intense police operation. There was yelling, running, and the occasional squawk from a terrified chicken. And through it all, Karen's minions stumbled around, trying to maintain the illusion of control. Then came the sprinklers. One of the patrol members accidentally triggered the irrigation system while trying to chase a chicken. Jets of water shot across the yard, soaking everyone, including themselves. Mud splashed everywhere. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch. Karen's carefully orchestrated plan had completely imploded, and the farm had become a chaotic playground of wet clothes, flying chickens, and confused authority figures. The lead officer stepped forward, finally establishing order around the crates. Karen's patrol was instructed to step aside, which they did reluctantly, their faces a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. I watched, trying to suppress my laughter as they hesitated, clearly unsure of how to exit gracefully. One of them even attempted to argue, pointing at my compost pile as if that somehow still mattered. It didn't, none of it did. I realized in that moment that Karen's obsession with control had created the perfect storm. Her patrol, armed with clipboards and misplaced confidence, had wandered straight into a professional operation they were utterly unprepared for. And I, the calm observer with my coffee now long gone, was witnessing it all unfold with the kind of satisfaction only comes from knowing your sanity and your chickens remain intact. By the time the chaos reached its peak, I understood something crucial. Karen had underestimated reality. Her need for control, her obsession with enforcing the tiniest rules, had collided spectacularly with a world far bigger than her HOA newsletter. And while her minions fumbled through the chaos, I remained on my porch, quietly reveling in the absurdity of it all. This was far beyond a simple HOA dispute. It was the moment I realized that sometimes life gives you chaos, and sometimes that chaos comes dressed in fluorescent vests and clipboards, completely unaware of the storm they've walked into. And I, of course, had the perfect front row seat. After what felt like an eternity of chaos, the lead officer finally motioned for everyone to calm down. Karen's patrol shuffled awkwardly, drenched and muttering excuses, their clipboards clutched like life preservers. I stayed behind the hay bales, trying not to laugh too loudly, though every fiber of me wanted to burst out in applause. Karma, it seemed, had a sense of humor, and Karen was its favorite punchline. The officer stepped forward and addressed me directly. Calm, measured, with that unmistakable aura of authority, he said, "Ma'am, I believe you weren't aware of what was going on here, correct?" I nodded, still catching my breath from laughing at the scene. "No," I said, "just your average morning on the farm until Karen decided my chickens were a threat to society." He smiled slightly, a mixture of understanding and mild amusement. "You're correct," he said. "This was a high-level police sting operation. The crates you saw contained evidence related to a criminal investigation in the neighboring area. Everything was secure until your guests arrived." My eyebrows shot up. "Guests?" I asked. "Karen sent a patrol," I muttered, gesturing vaguely toward the still-drenched, flustered group of neighbors. "Yes," he said. "They inadvertently interfered with the operation." I couldn't stop myself from laughing. In my head, I pictured Karen sitting at home, blissfully unaware that her desire to police my farm had turned into an international embarrassment. Her patrol had stumbled straight into a real-life crime scene and, without any training, without a plan, had created absolute chaos. I glanced at them and the sight was almost poetic. One member of the patrol was trying to wring water out of his vest. Another was packing, muttering something about fines and bylaws as if that would matter now. The lead patrol member, the one who had tried so hard to look authoritative, was standing frozen, staring at the officer like he had personally offended him. It was beautiful in its absurdity. The officer continued, "We've secured the evidence and everyone is safe. Your farm, while inadvertently involved, was not compromised. You handled this remarkably well under the circumstances." I blinked, astonished. Me, remarkably well? I hadn't even moved a muscle, just sat behind a hay bale laughing while Karen's squad fumbled through the situation. Still, I accepted the compliment, nodding graciously. Meanwhile, Karen's patrol tried to interject, clearly desperate to regain some semblance of authority. "We were enforcing neighborhood regulations," one shouted. "Community standards matter." Another tried to hand over a clipboard as if that would impress the officers. The lead officer simply shook his head, sighing. "Thank you," he said politely, "but your presence is not required here." The look on their faces was priceless. Humiliation, confusion, and sheer disbelief all rolled into one. I had to fight the urge to step forward and quip, "Maybe next time, just send an email." The thought made me laugh quietly. Karen had orchestrated this raid thinking it would intimidate me, enforce some imaginary rule, and show her neighborhood power. Instead, it had ended in complete chaos, laughter, and one of the most memorable mornings in my life. As the officers finished securing the crates and escorted them away, I took a deep breath, looking around my farm. Chickens were still clucking indignantly, sprinklers were dripping, and mud smeared every corner where Karen's patrol had staggered. And in the midst of all that, I realized how absurdly satisfying it felt. For once, Karen's overreach had backfired spectacularly. Her obsession with control, her need to micromanage, had collided with reality, and she had lost utterly and completely. The officer gave me one last nod and left, leaving me alone with the aftermath. Karen's patrol lingered a moment, unsure if they should apologize, flee, or call for reinforcements. Finally, they trudged off, drenched, humiliated, and probably rethinking every life choice that had led them to this moment. I stepped onto the porch, hands on my hips, and surveyed the farm. The chaos had left a mark: mud, scattered papers, and very disgruntled chickens, but the biggest damage was to Karen's pride. And as I sipped my now cold coffee, I realized that some days victory doesn't come quietly. Sometimes it arrives in the form of chaos, drenched neighbors, and the sweet, sweet sound of karma doing its job. Karen had no idea what had just happened. Her patrol had been humiliated, her power questioned, and my farm had survived intact. And in that moment, I couldn't help but grin. The morning that began with a simple coffee had ended with a story I would tell for years, and one that my chickens, in all their feathered glory, would never forget. By the following morning, word of the chaos had already begun to spread. Social media in our little neighborhood moved faster than I expected. Someone had filmed snippets of Karen's patrols slipping, tripping, and generally failing spectacularly, and the videos were going viral among our neighbors. I scrolled through the posts while sipping my coffee, barely able to contain my laughter. There was Karen, drenched and flustered, pointing at my compost pile as if it were the root of all evil, and her patrol struggling to maintain any shred of dignity. The beauty of it was in the contrast. On one side, the officers had maintained their professionalism, handling the situation with calm authority. On the other, Karen's minions were hopelessly outmatched, flailing around like extras in a bad comedy. One clip showed a patrol member slipping in mud, tumbling into the sprinkler, and being drenched head to toe while trying desperately to salvage his clipboard. It was perfect. I couldn't stop laughing, but there was also a strange sense of satisfaction. Karen had spent months, maybe years, enforcing her tiny kingdom of rules and fines, and now her obsession with control had turned into the most public humiliation possible. Her patrol, the ones she trusted to enforce her ridiculous sense of order, had been completely exposed for what they were: overzealous neighbors armed with clipboards and false confidence. Neighbors were commenting online, sharing their amusement and tagging friends who had witnessed Karen's antics firsthand. Memes circulated instantly, Karen, drenched and furious, with captions like, "When your HOA patrol meets reality," and "Chicken chaos level Karen." I couldn't help but chuckle. Karma, it seemed, had a sharp sense of humor. Despite all the humor, there was a tense undercurrent. I knew Karen was capable of plotting revenge. She thrived on being in control, on asserting dominance, and she did not take public humiliation lightly. But even with her plotting, I felt a strange sense of relief. Her patrol had been exposed for what it was, and I had survived intact. The farm was still mine, my chickens were still free, and my sanity, remarkably, was unscathed. I went out to check on the chickens, who were cautiously pecking around the yard as if evaluating whether the coast was clear. The sprinklers still dripped, mud smeared the grass, and remnants of Karen's patrol's chaos were scattered everywhere. I couldn't help but laugh quietly to myself. I had survived Karen's wrath, her patrol's incompetence, and a police operation I hadn't even known existed. Later, I overheard neighbors talking about the events. One mentioned seeing Karen trying to email the HOA board frantically, attempting to spin the story in her favor. Another laughed, describing the viral memes that had already spread across the local social media groups. Karen's credibility, built over years of micromanaging lawns and fences, had taken a spectacular hit. And while she tried desperately to save face, everyone else, myself included, was enjoying the show. I reflected on the absurdity of it all. Karen had tried to assert her authority over me, over my farm, and over my life, only to be humbled in the most public and hilarious way possible. Her obsession with rules had collided with reality, and reality had won spectacularly. My little farm, the chickens, and yes, even my compost pile had survived untouched while Karen's empire of control crumbled in the mud. And yet, as funny as it all was, I knew the story wasn't quite over. Karen, humiliated as she was, would no doubt be scheming something. She thrived on control, on authority, and she did not handle failure well. But for now, I had won, and the farm had emerged victorious. As I sipped my coffee, watching the sun glint off the muddy chaos left behind, I realized something important. Life is unpredictable, absurd, and often hilarious. And sometimes, the very thing that seems like a disaster, Karen sending a patrol to raid my farm, turns into one of the most satisfying victories you could imagine. The farm was safe, the chickens were free, and Karen's reputation, well, let's just say it had taken a permanent nosedive. By the time the day ended, I felt a rare combination of relief, amusement, and triumph. Karen might still be plotting, but her power, for now, had been neutralized. And as I watched my chickens peck happily through the chaos left behind, I knew one thing for certain: life with Karen would never be boring, and this story would be told for years to come. By the time the sun was setting over my farm, a calmness had finally returned. The sprinklers had stopped spraying, the mud had mostly dried, and the chickens were cautiously returning to their usual spots, as if reviewing the events of the morning and deciding collectively that the coast was finally clear. I leaned on the porch railing, sipping what was left of my now lukewarm coffee, and allowed myself to exhale for the first time in hours. The chaos of Karen's patrol was still fresh in my mind, and every memory of it made me grin. Slipping in mud, drenched vests, flustered expressions, flailing clipboards, it had all been perfect. My neighbors had been watching too, from the edges of their yards, trying to catch a glimpse of the absurdity. Some had even filmed the entire ordeal, and I had to admit, the videos going viral were a sweet bonus. Karma, it seemed, had delivered justice in the most public and hilarious way possible. Karen, meanwhile, had been completely silent since the incident. For a woman who thrived on control, this was humiliating. I imagined her at home, meticulously typing emails, trying to salvage what little dignity she had left. The HOA board probably wasn't sympathetic, and the neighbors certainly weren't. Her reputation, once inflated like a balloon, had deflated spectacularly, and there was nothing she could do about it. I walked across the yard, checking on the remnants of the chaos. Muddy footprints marked the path of her patrol's frantic retreat, the sprinklers had left small puddles that glimmered in the evening sun, and a few feathers from the panicked chickens were scattered across the grass. It was a mess, yes, but it was my mess, and it was a reminder of the triumph of sanity, calm, and a little bit of humor over unwarranted tyranny. The neighbors trickled back to their homes, some chuckling quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what had happened. Word of the incident was spreading like wildfire. I could hear the distant laughter, the soft murmur of conversations about the absurdity of Karen's patrol walking straight into a real police operation. For once, the neighborhood had collectively agreed on something. Karen had been humbled, and I had survived. As the evening settled in, I found myself reflecting on the past few days. Karen's obsession with rules and authority had collided with reality in the most spectacular way. Her patrol, armed with clipboards and misplaced confidence, had been completely outmatched, and yet through it all my farm had remained intact, my chickens unscathed, and my coffee, well, mostly cold, but that was a minor detail. I took a deep breath, enjoying the peace. Life had returned to its normal rhythm, the chickens clucking softly, the wind rustling through the trees, and the distant hum of neighbors finishing their day. Karen's power had been exposed for what it really was, an overblown sense of control that didn't hold up in the real world. And while I knew she might continue her antics, her reach had been diminished, and my farm had survived untouched. That night I sat on the porch with my dog at my feet, watching the stars begin to twinkle. The day had been chaotic, ridiculous, and utterly unforgettable. But through all the laughter, mud, and panic, one thing was clear: I had stood my ground. Karen had overstepped, reality had intervened, and I had come out the other side with my farm, my dignity, and my sanity intact. I smiled, realizing that some battles aren't fought with words or rules. They're survived with patience, a sense of humor, and a willingness to let chaos play out just long enough for the truth to reveal itself. My farm had been tested, Karen had been humbled, and the neighborhood had witnessed the absurdity of power when it collided with reality. As the night settled, the farm returned to its peaceful rhythm. Chickens roamed freely, the sprinklers rested, and I finally had a moment to enjoy the quiet. Karen's patrol had vanished from the scene, their humiliation complete, and I knew that for the first time in years, the farm and I had the upper hand. Life with Karen would never be boring, but it didn't need to be. That day had taught a lesson in humility, patience, and the importance of laughter in the face of absurdity. And as I watched my farm settle under the calm glow of the evening, I knew this story would be told for years, chickens, mud, and all. Karma had won, and the farm had survived intact. Every HOA has a story on HOA Headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.